Hello everyone, this is the first part of our video on the overview of case writing, and the focus of this video is primarily around how to write a case, how to approach an accounting case, what are the factors you need to think about, and what in particular are the areas of case writing that you should focus on so that you can become an excellent case writer. So jumping right into the slides, and these slides are posted on the Blackboard along with 3 cases that we'll look at in lecture. So when we're looking at cases, you're looking at 8 general areas that you need to be considering. So you start with your situation analysis. You look at the users, the needs, and the constraints. You look at identifying the issue, analyzing the issue, and concluding and making a recommendation on the issue. And these 3 things are probably the most important: identifying the issues, analyzing, and concluding on every single issue. Then there is the action plan, the contingency plan, and professional qualities and skills, which are things that you build in as a supplement to your case writing. So jumping right into the situational analysis, and there's a series of slides around the types of things you need to be thinking about when you're analyzing a particular situation. So right here up front, what you want to be doing is looking at the background of the company. What is the mission and strategy? What are their objectives? What targets are they trying to meet? What are the expectations of the company and how they're trying to position themselves? Just to give you a flavor of what the company is about. You then want to get into starting to look at some of the internal factors, like is there anything unique about this business? What is going on in their market? Are they ranked higher than their competition? Are they a leader in the business, and so on? And again, this is just to give you more context for what to look forward to when you are reading and analyzing your case. External factors, similar to internal factors. You want to look at what's going on in the economy. So if it's an oil company and prices of oil are going down, but for whatever reason revenue is either flat or it's going up, that would seem incongruent with external factors in a certain business. So you want to make sure that you consider both the internal and external factors when you are looking at your case. The next thing you want to look at is the financials of the company. And depending on what information is given to you in a case, let's say you were given a balance sheet and income statement, you want to start making or start putting in calculations of, for example, ratios, or you want to look at cost benefit on a certain piece of information that you might be given. And this all becomes relevant purely based on how much information you are given in your particular case. You then look at key success factors and key uncertainties. And again, this is supplementary information that you're looking at. Are there 1, 2, maybe even 3 things that are vital to the success of the company? And in the case, are they telling you something that would inhibit the company from being successful? And if there are factors like that are a success factor or an uncertainty for the business, that might relate to the issues that you need to analyze. So you need to connect the 2 together where it becomes relevant. Once you get past sort of that overview part or that supplementary information that you need to provide in a case, then you really get into the main parts of the case. And when you get into the main parts, you are always considering who the users of the financial statements are and what their needs are, and in particular what their information needs are. So from a user perspective, they're looking at financial statements to assess the performance of the company. If a user is the tax authority or the CRA, they're looking at, well, how much money is this company making? Are they paying enough taxes? If you're an investor in the business, you're looking at, is this company profitable? And should I be investing more? Should I be reducing my investment in the company? Am I going to get a dividend? If you are, for example, a creditor, you might be looking at, well, can this company pay the interest that I have on my loan? So for example, the bondholders, and this is very relevant to Chapter 10, if you're holding bonds in a company and you see the financial statements, you are particularly interested in knowing that they have the cash or the means in that company to pay the interest on your bond, and if it's coming close to maturity, that they have the cash to actually pay you back the principal amount or the face amount of the bond when you go to redeem it. So that's some examples that you might think of from a user and information need perspective. You always want to try and tie your issues and your recommendations back to the user needs. And that's very important to remember. You want to rank your issues based on the needs of the users. And that's a good way to transition ourselves over to looking at constraints and opportunities. When you are looking at constraints, the primary constraint you will likely see on an accounting-based case is the use of GAAP. So are they a public company? They're probably constrained by using IFRS. If they're a private company, they're probably constrained by using either ASPE or IFRS or a different financial framework. Most times it's going to be ASPE or IFRS. So therefore, when you are talking about the case, you want to make reference to, this would be the treatment under ASPE, or this would be the treatment under IFRS. And it's very important to remember that constraint when you are making your recommendations. Second thing you want to always be thinking about, and again, the slide has a number of different things you can think about, but are there any financial constraints? And when I say financial constraints, we're talking about things like covenants. So we've talked about what a covenant might be. There might be a certain ratio that a company needs to meet. There might be a minimum income threshold that they need to meet every year. And those are the types of constraints that is something that you would think of as a hook. So when I say hook, in a particular case, it might say a company needs to have a minimum income of this amount. All of the issues, or many of the issues in that case, might go back to that original constraint where revenue might be overstated, expenses might be understated, and because of that, they are meeting a financial constraint, but by doing the wrong accounting. And that's really where things come together in a case. There's a constraint, the accounting is wrong. When you make recommendations on the correct accounting, you will notice that they are offside on a certain financial covenant. And that's usually how cases might play out as you work through them. So moving forward into defining the issues. Now this is probably one of the three most important parts of the case. The important thing here is to make sure that you think about what the issue is from an accounting perspective. And you start with the accounting perspective and then work outwards from there. So if there's an ethical issue or there is other types of issues that are supplementary, you want to make note of them, but that shouldn't be the first thing you start discussing. You want to start with discussing what the accounting issues are, specifically related to what accounts. So if there's a revenue issue, you want to talk about it in that perspective. If there's an issue with accounting for bonds or accounting for long-term assets, you want to identify that issue. You want to clearly explain why it's an issue. Perhaps the accounting is incorrect and you want to explain that. And if there's any numbers associated with that, you want to always present that quantitative analysis so that it's clear to the reader that you understood the issue. You also, when you're analyzing issues, you always want to be cognizant of ranking the issues. If there's an accounting error, but it's for $100 and $100 is not material, like it's not a significant number or not significant to the users in any way, you do not want to be talking about that for an entire page because you're just wasting your time. So identify the issues, rank the issues, and then get into analyzing the issues. Now there's a couple slides on analyzing the issues, but the one point I want to leave you with is you want to make sure when you're analyzing issues, you are specifically looking at what the available alternatives are. So when we talk about the available alternatives, the most important thing is what your constraint is. And that's where your available alternatives are going to be. So if your constraint is IFRS and you start giving alternatives that are not IFRS compliant, then those are invalid alternatives. If your constraint is ASPE, then you want to give your alternatives that are ASPE compliant. So what that means, for example, is let's say you're in a situation where there's a lawsuit, and this is something we talked about when we were talking about liabilities. If the fact pattern in the case is telling you that there is no so in the lawsuit, if the fact pattern is telling you there is a lawsuit pending, but there is no information on what the contingent amount might be, and in the fact pattern it's saying nothing around that they've gone to court yet, or they're talking about settlement, or what the facts in the case are, then your alternatives can touch on, for example, the fact that they need to consider how much to accrue and so on, but you don't want to present those as clear alternatives, or even in a recommendation to say they need to record something and they need to have disclosure around the contingency, because the fact pattern tells you that you probably under IFRS or ASPE cannot actually accrue for anything, and the facts don't even give you a number that you could be recording as a liability. So that's some of the things you want to think about. When you're analyzing the issues, try and give one or two different alternatives, and when you're done giving those alternatives, you want to make a clear recommendation or conclusion, and you want to tie back that recommendation or conclusion back to your users and what they would care about. So if the users care about net income, then your recommendation has to explain what the effects on net income are going to be. If there's two alternatives and their users want higher net income, and there's two valid alternatives under GAAP, your recommendation should be the one that results in the higher net income, because that's what your users care about. So you want to keep that in mind when you make your recommendation or your conclusion. Now the next few slides talk about more supplementary information. So if there's a general decision that they need to make, what are the actions they need to take, what are the things they need to think about, so that they can implement their plan. If there are constraints to them implementing something. So let's say, for example, they have a shortage of accounting staff or employees, but they have no money to hire more staff. You don't want to recommend that they hire more staff, because that's an incongruent recommendation to their current situation. So again, in the action plan, if you need one, you have to think back to what your constraints might be. Contingencies, if you give an action plan and you're required to give one, then if the original plan isn't going to work, is there a plan B that you can recommend? And that's all we're talking about in contingencies. This is not your accounting contingencies. Format of the report, this is extremely important, usually results in some form of professionalism marks. You want to use the memo format. So that's this to, from, re, or to, from subject line, and then get into what they're asking you for. So coming back to the first slide, like we talked about, these are the things that are most important that are highlighted in red. The other parts, if you're asked for them, there's supplementary information. You do not need to spend all your time in those areas. You want to focus on the issues, the users, their needs. You want to focus on analyzing the issues and making conclusions and or recommendations. When we talk about competency-based marking, you want to always aim to be in that RC or C, which is reaching competent and competent. To get highly competent, you might end up there when you analyze an issue really well, but if you aim for highly competent all the time, what's going to happen is you might not have enough breadth of issues because you're going into too much depth. So always look for a balance. Try and analyze 3 to 4 issues in reasonable depth so that you get enough RC and C marks that you're scoring well on the case. That's all we've had, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to ask at any time, and we'll look at practice cases in class.